When you begin noticing that Matthew chapter 24 is limiting events to the days of the people that were standing there listening to Jesus, especially after reading Matthew 23, where he told those hypocrites and Pharisees, you are the children of your fathers who persecuted, killed the prophets, and said, this generation is going to have all the blood guilt from Abel's death right over to Zacharias, son of Barachias' death on your heads. And he said, Jerusalem, Jerusalem, I would have protected you. And then he goes into Matthew 24 and he says, you see all these buildings? And then the disciples are showing him the buildings, pointing them out, devastated that he had just made the statement that their house would be left unto them desolate, speaking of the temple destruction. And Jesus goes, not one stone is going to be left unturned. And he said, you standing here are going to see these things happen that will lead up to this destruction. And there's going to be wars and rumors of wars and so forth and so on. And you read about how all these events in Matthew 24 would happen in that generation, including the temple destruction. The only way any of those events could be in our future is if there's somebody alive that was there when the temple was destroyed, because Jesus said all these things, including the temple destruction, would happen in a generation. And of course, a generation is a lifetime of somebody. And I don't think there's anybody alive today that was there in AD 70. But then a question starts rising up. Well, what about these verses that speak about celestial phenomena? How could they be in 70 AD? I don't remember any historical accounts of the sun turning black and the moon to blood. Immediately after the tribulation of those days shall the sun be darkened, and the moon shall not give her light, and the stars shall fall from heaven, and the powers of the heavens shall be shaken. And then shall appear the sign of the Son of Man in heaven, and then shall all the tribes of the earth mourn, and they shall see the Son of Man coming in the clouds of heaven with power and great glory. And we'll get to verse 30 in another video. But I want to just focus right now on these celestial signs. Did they happen? Well, in order to understand this, you've got to recognize that the Bible referred to events similar to this that were, according to the time frame in which they were told, had come and gone. And it happened more than once. You see, when you think of it, taking this literally, the sun turning black, the moon to blood, and the stars falling, you think that would only happen once. But it happened several times, but not literally. You've got to let the Bible interpret the Bible. And when you go to Isaiah 13, you see similar words when it's speaking about the burden of Babylon. Now here, God was prophesying to Babylon. And if you drop down to verse 10, it says, well, let me read verse 9 for context. The day of the Lord cometh, both cruel both with wrath and fierce anger, to lay the land desolate, and he shall destroy the sinners thereof out of it. For the stars of heaven and the constellations thereof shall not give their light. The sun shall be darkened in his going forth, and the moon shall not cause her light to shine. And this was talking about Babylon. And in order to understand this again, in turn, think of Genesis when God said, let the greater light rule the day, the lesser light rule the night. He's talking about the sun and the moon, and the stars would be for signs. Now, the idea of rulership is associated with the sun and the moon. You want to know why so many flags of the world have stars on them, or suns, or moons? It's because these things depict kingdoms and rulership. Just as the sun would rule the day and the moon would rule the night, kingdoms have used this, even in cultures throughout the ages, to represent their dominion. So when it's talking about Babylon and the constellations not shining and the sun and the moon not giving their light, Babylon's lights were going to go out. It was their kingdom coming to an end. This is biblical language. It's old, ancient cultural understanding and language that these cultures had way back in before the New Testament came, in the Old Testament days on into the New Testament. Now you've got to understand, we're 2,000 years away from the time when Jesus spoke these things in Matthew. We're half a world of culture away with the 2,000 years on top of that. There were idioms and metaphors that they used in their culture that they were very familiar with. Nobody understood these scriptures as speaking about the actual sun is going to stop shining. The actual constellations aren't going to be there anymore. The stars are going to fall. They knew it was lights out for Babylon. And you see the same thing again in Ezekiel 32 and 7. And this again was way, way back. It says, "And when I shall put thee out, I will cover the heaven and make the stars thereof dark. I will cover the sun with a cloud, and the moon shall not give her light. And all the bright lights of heaven will I make dark over thee, and set darkness upon thy land." And who's he talking to? Take a lamentation upon Pharaoh, the king of Egypt. And so now you're reading about Egypt's lights going out. It's a kingdom coming to an end. I used to think this was literal too. You see, people in the first century to whom Jesus was preaching and to whom the apostles and the gospel writers were writing, they knew the entire Old Testament better than we know one book of the Old Testament. They knew it like the back of their hands. They were taught those things from children. I'm amazed at today the ignorance amongst Christians that go to church that hardly know the Bible. And pastors, don't blame them. You're the ones that are teaching the Bible. And so I came across these passages and realized, well, wait a minute. How many times is the sun supposed to stop shining? And the moon turn to blood and go dark, or constellations and stars falling and all of that. Well, then I learned it's talking about the lights out of a kingdom. It's using their cultural language and understanding that they were all very aware of. For example, Adam Clarke had quoted from a scholar, and he was quoting from Isaac Newton. And he said, and Isaac Newton was a very strong Christian, wrote writings about scripture and so forth. Yes, that guy that recognized gravity. He made this statement. He said, "The whole world natural, consisting of heaven and earth, signifies the whole world politic, consisting of thrones and people, or so much of it as considered in prophecy. And the things in that world signify the analogous things in this. For the heavens and the things thereto signify thrones and dignities, and those who enjoy them, and the earth with the things thereon, the inferior people, the lowest parts of the earth, called Hades or hell, the lowest or most miserable part of them. Great earthquakes and the shaking of heaven and earth are put for the shaking of kingdoms, so as to distract and overthrow them. The creating a new heaven and new earth, and the passing away of an old one, or the beginning and the end of a world, for the rise and ruin of a body politic, signified thereby. The sun for the whole species of and race of kings in the kingdoms of the world politic. The moon for the body of the common people, considered as the king's wife. The stars for subordinate princes and great men, or for bishops and rulers of the people of God. When the sun is Christ, setting the sun, moon, and stars, darkening the sun, turning the moon to blood, and failing of the stars, for the ceasing of a kingdom." And that was Sir Isaac Newton's observations on the prophecies, part 1 in his writings, chapter 2. The common person just reading the book of Matthew and seeing these kind of prophecies thinks, oh, well, the sun's actually going to turn to blood and so forth. Well, no, that's not the case. It's biblical, apocalyptic, prophetic language. And we need to understand what they understood when they read these things. When we look at the Old Testament references to the same things you're reading in Matthew, then you begin to realize that the sun and the stars didn't actually stop shining. You have to take these figures from the Old Testament and let the Bible interpret itself. And people that say these things are literal, they have a complete lack of awareness of the idioms used in Hebrew scriptures. Let's look at another prophecy in Isaiah and notice that it's talking about sun, moon, and stars and so forth not continuing to shine. But keep reading. Look at what he says after verse 4. "For my sword shall be bathed in heaven. It shall come down upon Idumea and upon the people of my curse to judgment. The sword of the Lord is filled with blood. It is made fat with fatness, and with the blood of lambs and goats." Now, does a sword literally have a belly and a mouth that it's going to actually feed on blood and become fat? Is a sword going to take a bath in heaven? It'll bathe in heaven and come down on Idumea and the people of his curse? No, these are all poetic, prophetic expressions that Jesus utilized because That's what the people to whom he was speaking were familiar with. These Old Testament prophecies. All of their minds would go back to instances like this and say it was going to happen all over again. So here we got Babylon, we've got Egypt, and Edom. And so what's he saying in Matthew? Jerusalem's lights are going to go out. A kingdom is going to come to an end. It's going to be this persecutor of Jesus and the apostles that's going to be judged by God, just like Jesus said, great tribulation such as never was. And he was referring to the blood guilt being poured out in the form of the wrath of God upon Israel that was suited for the death of Abel, right back to Adam's first son who was killed unrighteously, right on to Zacharias, son of Berechias. It's not talking literally. So understand that when you read these words, let the Bible interpret the Bible, and prophecy becomes easy to understand.